Hello, my name is Rose Bryson, and my talk today is titled Digital Bioethics, Creating and Sharing 3D Models of Human Remains in Legacy Collections. Making 3D models of human and non-human animals is at the core of the morphometric research that my co-author, Dr. Valerie Burke DeLeon, and I both do. Digitization of physical specimens and collections, like the examples on screen, is an extremely valuable tool that we use in teaching, research, and community outreach. And it allows researchers to do things like view the internal structure of bones in a non-destructive way, or capture complex shape change. But before we digitize human remains, we have to consider their provenience and the ethical use of unconsented skeletal remains. Today, I'll discuss the origin of skeleton collecting and how that history is inextricably tied to our current dilemma on what skeletal material is okay to digitize and share publicly. To do this, let's first cover these three terms that we'll be using in today's discussion. The first being digital bioethics. This refers to the ethical use of digital representations of biological structures. In this context, it could be ethical use of digital 3D models, CT scans, X-rays, or 2D images of human skeletal remains. The second term is legacy collections. I'm using this term to describe older skeletal collections that have been built over time with many contributors and was potentially established during a time in archaeology and anthropology where there was a different understanding of the level of decedent consent needed to accession remains into a collection. And the final term is ethically protected populations. My talk will specifically be addressing how legacy collections in the US and elsewhere potentially hold remains that were collected without the consent of the deceased, their family, or their community. And the skeletal remains of indigenous and enslaved peoples in North America and other marginalized or oppressed populations were specifically targeted by white collectors. So I propose this term to refer to human remains that require an elevated level of protection in deciding whether they should be digitized and deserve special posthumous ethical protections that they weren't afforded in life. A lot of debate has occurred in our country about physical human remains, how they should be acquired, stored, and displayed. But we've yet to decide whether those same rules apply to their digital representations. CT scans of their bones, 3D models, X-rays. The major US organizations for archaeology, anthropology, and anatomy haven't yet produced a code of conduct for digital human remains, although work is currently underway. And so the decision of whether skeletal material is okay to digitize is then left to the individual, and that ambiguity can lead to unintentionally unethical behavior. Digitized human remains necessitate unique moral considerations, given the power, immediacy, and finality of disseminating things over the internet. In digital bioethics conversations about human remains, personhood and objectification are two important concepts. During life, we endeavor to value and protect human bodies through legal protections like the Declaration of Human Rights. But does that respect for personhood translate to the body after death? A deceased body has surprisingly few legal rights, but ethical use of human remains should take personhood into consideration. Does the human skeleton retain those rights, protecting them from all forms of harm, physical and to their lived identity? Or do the bones simply become an object after death, devoid of personhood? This question will be at the center of digital bioethics conversations as we decide whether digital representations deserve ethical protections the same way that living humans do, because they still represent the lived identity. Samuel Redman states that in early skeletal collecting, human remains collected for science were interpreted as having lost their spiritual content once taken from the cemetery, burial ground, or morgue. I argue that skeletal remains maintain their personhood after death, and that it's important not to divorce the life history from the remains. In our current system, without a field-wide code of ethics for digitizing human remains, if you make objects available for open access downloading, it should be assumed that as a steward of those remains, you're consenting to not just academic use, but worldwide public non-academic use and reproduction of those models. And this is a point that researchers may not have considered when they use internet platforms to present and share their collections. Once those models are online and downloadable, you lose control over their use. So they can be 3D printed, manipulated into a different form, or sold as physical or digital replicas. You can try to limit use with Creative Commons licenses, but identifying violations and enforcing the license are often not feasible. Amazing resources like Sketchfab and Morphosource don't yet require you to declare the provenience or consent status of the remains that you upload, and the vast majority of models on these platforms don't include information in the description. This example on screen from the University of Michigan is a rare example of a model that does have a consent declaration. And it clearly shows that their remains were obtained and are being used ethically and legally. Using or uploading models without this contextual information becomes exponentially more problematic if those remains shouldn't have been held in that collection in the first place. So let's center this conversation within a historical framework for anthropology, archaeology, and anatomy, three fields that have a history of collecting, storing, and teaching with skeletal remains for hundreds of years. Skeletal collecting as a practice began in the United Kingdom and then in the United States as a race to collect what were considered rare or exotic specimens from the white perspective. And author Samuel Redman recounts that Indigenous bodies from Native Americans and Australian Aborigines were especially prized. And while many white individuals' remains were also collected during this period, this talk focuses on the ethical dilemma of digitizing the remains of marginalized or oppressed populations within legacy collections. I list some of the sources here that museums and universities have used over time to acquire skeletons. But today we understand that this early practice distills down to white scientists feeling entitled to and taking possession of non-white remains. And these remains were then used to prop up the now invalidated idea of racial hierarchies. So it's critical to ground these digital ethics conversations in that context of our field's joint history when we discuss digitizing remains in legacy collections for further use. Because legacy collections were built with many contributors over a long period of time, paperwork about how those remains were acquired was often never collected or has been lost. This creates the current issue that universities and museums across the country potentially contain remains of marginalized and oppressed populations, which we refer to as ethically protected populations, that did not consent to our use of their bodies after death, and therefore in most situations shouldn't be digitized for further use. So as modern skeletal researchers working with 3D digitized remains, we have to consider if we're acting ethically by A, continuing to store remains of ethically protected populations that were collected without a modern understanding of consent, and B, is digitization and further use of those remains a continuation of the colonialism that they experienced in life. So now that we understand the potential problem, let's discuss what can be done about it. Significant work has already been initiated as recent as April of this year in a collective statement by the Association of Black Anthropologists, the Society of Black Archaeologists, and the Black and Bioanth Collective, calling for a national audit of all human remains in universities and museums across the country, identifying the provenience of legacy collections, and initiating the repatriation process for remains collected without consent. Multiple authors such as Priscilla Ogum and Sabina Hildebrand also suggest that contextual information about the life history and consent status of remains should be included with the uploaded digital model. As digitization increases as this incredible tool for teaching and research, it's vital that every institution holding skeletal remains develops a code of ethics for skeletal digitization and sharing. As we discussed earlier, when digital data is put online and made available for users to download, it's very easy to lose control over that data. So it's incredibly important to know the provenience of your collection before you begin scanning remains. And if in the process of inventorying your collection, you discover that remains were collected without consent or represent ethically protected populations, those remains shouldn't be digitized without overwhelming justification, such as the consent of descendant or associated communities. And as I stated before, if you have remains that are consented for academic use, you can include contextual information about the provenience of that skeleton in the model description. Most 3D model sharing platforms have a space for the steward to give a model description. So we suggest that contextual information be included here so that users can make a more informed ethical decision about whether those remains are appropriate to use for their project. I made an example above of consented remains being scanned and made available. So the model description reads, this model represents the skull of a blank man who has been consented for educational use by the blank tribal council. This model is not consented for commercial use. This provides clear context about the remains and guidelines for ethical behavior. As we start to establish digital codes of ethics for human remains at our institutions, it's important that we recognize that some groups will necessitate more ethical protection than others. So as we've discussed here, ethically protected populations that were marginalized or oppressed in life, and whose remains were collected without their or their community's consent, deserve the posthumous respect of not digitizing them for further use. I include other categories of remains that are commonly digitized here, for you to consider as you're constructing your code of ethics for digitization, that there's a spectrum of ethical protections here. Some of these categories, like fossilized human remains, may not require any restrictions to their digitization or sharing, but should be included in your code of ethics to guide researchers through ethical digitization. Other examples to consider where they fall on this ethical spectrum are modern forensic cases, particularly if they were unidentified or unclaimed remains, archaeological specimens and their contextual histories, and of course, any subadult remains. The way that these remains were obtained, cared for, and are continued to be used should be taken into consideration before any scanning occurs. It'll be very valuable to have a discipline-wide code of ethics for digitization, but each institution and department holding skeletal remains will still need to tailor their guidelines to their own specific collection. In conclusion, I'd encourage all researchers who digitize skeletal remains to create or update their code of ethics to include guidelines for ethical behavior in a digital platform. These ethical codes should take into account our field's history of skeletal acquisition without consent, and the current and future escalation of 3D sharing that should be done in a mindful way. In this process, we need to include higher standards for ethically protected populations in legacy collections, and provide contextual information about all shared data. Skeletal researchers and curators in anatomy, archaeology, and anthropology are accountable to the subjects that we study. So it's our responsibility to protect them from all forms of posthumous harm and to honor their lives by not decontextualizing their remains without great ethical consideration. Thank you.